fun things about being up here is getting to watch children's moments from this vantage point. I encourage you all to spend some time up here. Our scripture this morning is Psalm 46. To the choir master, a psalm of the sons of Korah, according to Alamot, a song. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her right early. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted in the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. One way we get a picture of a society is by looking at or listening to the music. What was the mood of the nation in the 30s and 40s? Listen to the war songs and the big band music. How about the 50s? Pushing the boundaries, growth, the baby boom, the beginnings of rock and roll. How about the 60s? One word, unrest. Is the church any different? Not really. Changes in the music reflect changes in the church. The first musical instruments, the first hymns in German instead of Latin. In the Brethren Church, the Church of the Brethren, we compare the old blue hymnal with the red hymnal and the new hymnal. And I'm sure that the Quakers do the same thing with their hymns. And you see reflected what changes have occurred in the denomination. There will be similarities and differences. But there is also a core that remains the same. We still sing hymns by Martin Luther, the Wesleys, and Fanny Crosby. What do you think of when you think of psalms? Hymns, right? The introductory material in one of my Bibles says, the living spirit of any religion shines through most clearly in its hymns. The Psalter is the hymnal of ancient Israel. We don't have the music of the Psalter, so we have to be satisfied with looking at the poetry of the Psalms. Now, you may remember my stories of my Old Testament professor in college, reading hymns in church when the sermon was bad. Incidentally, there is an index in the hymnal, so if you want to pick hymns that go along with our passage, you can do that too. Ron's remark to me was that hymns are great poetry, and many times have messages that are better than the preachers. Again, if you're reading hymns or psalms, I won't read it. I didn't get that psalms were poetry when I was little, because to me, poetry was rhyming iambic pentameter, although I didn't understand that either. Poems rhyme. For example, here are a few lines that may be familiar to you by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. I shot an arrow into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. It was the schooner Hesperus that sailed the wintry sea, and the skipper had taken his little daughter to bear him company. You're ready for a story, aren't you? Also look up the Highwayman by Alfred Moyes. That's a really good one. And here are a few by one of my favorite poets, Ogden Nash. God, in his wisdom, made the fly, and then forgot to tell us why. And the purist. I give you now Professor Twist, a conscientious scientist. Trustees exclaim, he never bungled, and send him off to distant jungles. Camped on a tropic riverside, one day he missed his loving bride. She had, the guide informed him later, been eaten by an alligator. Professor Twist could not but smile. You mean, he said, a crocodile. But my view of poetry was rather narrow. But Psalms is a book of poems. What kind of poems are included? Well, we have hymns, psalms of praise, laments, which I've read to you before, royal psalms, such as would be read at the coronation, thanksgiving psalms, pilgrimage psalms, wisdom psalms, which talk about the wise and the foolish, like our call to worship, enthronement psalms, expressing God's kingship over earth. Psalm 46 falls into the hymn of praise category. They have a typical structure. There's a call to worship, which is an invitation to anyone, the nations at large, Israel, nature, the psalmist, to come and worship God. Then there are motives for praise, listing God's works, many times in creation. In our psalm, it's concerning God's power beyond or in spite of creation. And then there's a renewed summons to worship. This psalm is also part of the subtype Songs of Zion because of the phrase and focus on the city of God in the central portion. The Songs of Zion extol Jerusalem as the place of God's choosing, his holy habitation, and the belief that it would be God's resting place forever. There's some terminology in the Psalms, the meaning of which is lost. Scholars have all sorts of theories, and sometimes it's anybody's best guess. Many of these terms occur in the introductions of the individual psalms. The introduction to our psalm is generally translated to the choir master for the sons of Korah, according to Alamot, a song. What on earth does that mean? To the choir master is well accepted because it occurs a lot of times in the Psalms. And it's used other places, the word choir master is used other places to mean leader. So it's not outlandish to translate this as to the choir master. A song occurs in numerous places other than the Psalms, so it's never disputed. But who are the sons of Korah? And what is the tune alone? Some think that because this is one of several, but not a lot, of psalms, it refers to the sons of Korah refers to a group who collected psalms. Another theory is that the sons of Korah were professional Levitical musicians. And this fits well with the thought that the term Selah, which occurs 3 times in Psalm 46, is an indication that there should be a musical interlude at that point. According to Alamot, is perhaps an indication that the psalm should be sung to that tune. Now, I think Bible study should be a little bit fun, and I find those explanations lacking. So, in the spirit of fun, I've come up with my own theories about these terms. Korah is also a term meaning baldness. Son of is a way of describing someone. A son of a thief was a thief. A son of the left was a left-handed man. It was customary in some areas at this time for mourners to shave their heads. So sons of baldness could mean mourners, and there were professional mourners who helped out at funerals. Or sons of baldness could mean bald men, or elderly men, or perhaps mature would be a better term. Alamot is the plural of a term which means young woman of marriageable age. So we might read this as, to the choir master for elderly men and young women, a song. Maybe it was a way of saying for bass and soprano. Or again, Could be that it was a note to the choir master from the psalmist that was never supposed to remain a part of the song. For those bald guys and that group of young girls who sing here. Remember, this is the spirit of fun, but I'm going with basics of grammar. Another term, Selah. Selah is a term used only in the Psalms and in Habakkuk. It's thought to have the meaning of being still or silent, and so it's thought that it's a musical direction for the voices to cease and for the musicians to perform an interlude. That makes good sense in our psalm. Selah occurs, as it does, at the end of each stanza and after the refrain. Again, we don't have the music to the Psalms. We have only the poetic text. We still have the direction at the end of the stanza to pause and be silent. So what do we do? There was a Christian musical group in the 70s called Selah. They took their name from this term, and their idea was that it was a signal for the worshiper or the reader to pause and think about what was just said. Selah. Think about it. You've also heard me mention another professor, David McCarthy was his name. He encouraged us to read a passage 50 times to get to know it before we tried to study it. The class I had him for was poetry, and we spent much of our time in the book of Psalms, although we never did this one. David also encouraged us to mark up the text. Get some colored pencils and mark the recurring words, phrases, ideas, and sounds. When you do that, you start to see patterns that aren't as obvious when you read the black and white. It's easier to understand why scholars say, this should be added, or this was added later, because it affects the meter and the parallelism and the layout of the stanzas. For example, in this psalm, it's almost indisputable that one thing was added and one was left out. First, the added thing. The bow he shatters, and he splits the spear. That's a complete thought in Hebrew poetry. Note the relationship of the parts of speech. Bow, shatters, splits, spear. Object, verb, verb, object. A, B, B, A. If there is another element, it usually occurs between the two B elements, or all three occur in the same order. Later, someone came along and thought that this needed a little more intensity and added, chariots he will burn with fire. Characteristically, it would be A, B, A, B, A, B if there were three sets. Now we have A, B, B, A, C, B. Chariots are in an entirely different class of weaponry than arrows and spears. And it alters the rhythm. So many conclude that it was a later addition. And if you were trying to look at the oldest form of the poem, it shouldn't be considered part of the original. On the other hand, the argument could be made that the intensification works. Arrows, spears, even chariots, the most high-tech and most powerful weapon known to humanity at the time. God will even burn chariots. Now for the left out then. Notice the term Selah. I'm sure you all have your books open, your laps. Notice the term Selah occurs 3 times at the end of verses 3, 7, and 11. Notice that immediately before that word, in verses 7 and 11, is the line, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. It acts as a refrain, separating the stanzas or sections that make up the hymn of praise. It is highly likely that it should also occur at the end of verse 3, right before Selah. Here it separates the stanzas about natural disasters and the city of God. Okay, that wraps up our textual criticism lesson. What else can we learn from Psalm 46? There are 2 sets of dangers mentioned. The first is from the natural world. I've talked to you before about the ancient worldview. but for those of you who were not here, the ancients believed that the world was a flat pan, kind of like a cookie sheet or a pie pan. It was supported on pillars that were believed to be the roots of the mountains. These supports kept the world from sinking into the primordial ocean, the chaotic deep. They kept us from sinking. The sky was a hollowed out bowl that kept back the waters above the earth. Across this bowl, the sun and moon traveled, and the stars were hung on it. And each evening, the sun went down into the deep to do battle. The waters are always a danger. I get that. I didn't learn how to swim until I was about 25. And I have a funny story about that if anyone wants to hear it sometime, but it will be better if someone related to Greg Tifton is around. Anyway, water was always a threat when you believed that the world hovered over an endlessly deep ocean. They experienced floods and tempests. They knew what happened when a boat took on water. The original deep of creation from which dry land was brought forth was always encroaching, always being held at bay, kind of like weeds in the garden. Chaos is ready to come back in and take over. Add to this the Canaanite beliefs that rivers and seas were ruled by hostile and capricious gods. You can see the kind of situation in which the differently believing Israelites found themselves. You can also see how these kinds of poems might have been used in an evangelical sort of way by the Israelites. You believe you must sacrifice to a river god to prevent flooding. Our God has him beat. When I was here not long ago, what did we talk about? Creation. Right. And what was the thing that I kept saying was brought out in Israel's account of creation? We believe a little differently. Good. This worldview is one of the things about which Israel believed differently. We will not fear when the earth's foundations shift, or when the mountains totter in the heart of the sea. The seas may roar, the waters may boil, the mountains may quake with the swelling of the current. The Lord of hosts is with us. A secure retreat for us is the God of Jacob. Selah. Think about it. The second set of dangers set forth in the psalm is that of the socio-political world, the nations at large. Israel occupied a unique position in the Fertile Crescent. Remember fifth grade geography when we learned about the Fertile Crescent? Where would you be? From Egypt up through Israel, Palestine, across Assyria, down into Babylon and Persia. Israel-Palestine got trampled by whichever army was attacking and by those retreating. And during some periods of history, that happened rather frequently. They were a trade route, an isthmus between the sea to the west and the desert to the east. They were a small nation, not like Egypt, Greece, Babylon, or Persia, and yet they had carved out for themselves, or rather the Lord of hosts had carved out for them, a place, albeit a rather fragile place, physically and geographically, as is evident by the list of superpower conquerors and potential conquerors that I mentioned. Nations roar, kingdoms totter, and they did. Assyria conquered Israel, Babylon conquered Assyria and Judah, and subjected the nation and the people to occupation and captivity, only to be conquered by Persia after not too long a time. But he gives voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. A secure retreat for us is the God of Jacob. Selah. Think of it. Our third stanza tells more of God's power and plan. Come, look at what God has done. He made heaven and earth. He's going to put an end to war. He makes weapons obsolete. This was a nice proclamation to hear if you lived in this area and saw attackers and attacked marching back and forth across your land. Israel had several failed attempts at political alliances during its history. Some believe this psalm was written after one such attempt as a means of giving a little political advice via religious poetry. Don't put your faith in warring powers and principalities. Cease warring. The theme of Psalm 46 is God is our refuge and help. Security in time of natural disaster. Shelter in times of political upheaval. Confidence in God over the world and its inhabitants, such that the abolition of war is within his power. Here's another time that David McCarthy's marking up of the text helps us to see what's in plain sight. Refuge, shelter, helper, abundant, secure retreat, all words regarding God and his relationship to humanity. When you mark up the text, you see some of these terms are repeated several times. You see phrases that are repeated and phrases set against one another. In times of distress, we will not fear. And there are words and phrases that can carry great comfort. The lines concerning the abolition of war. Who wouldn't be comforted by that? The words ascribed to God. Relax and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on earth. Ending with the refrain, the Lord of hosts is with us. A secure retreat for us is the God of Jacob. Selah. Think about it. Now, when I was here a few weeks ago, what did we talk about? Creation. Good. And what was the central point? The uniqueness of Israel among its neighbors. We believe a little differently. God is in control. What do you know? This psalm is saying the same thing. We don't fear when the mountains totter. We won't fear when the kingdoms around us totter. God dwells in Zion, and she will not totter. And there's another device of the poet, using the same verb twice regarding the perceived dangers present for the people of the time, and then again with a negative for those whom God helps. Mountains may totter, kingdoms may totter, not God and God's own. Now, we Christians, with some exceptions, I'm sure, are not Zionists. We don't believe that God dwells exclusively in Jerusalem. We don't tie God's ruling and power to any city. Cities rise and cities fall. We watched as New York tottered in September 2001. In the history books, we read of the burning of Atlanta and other cities during the Civil War. We may know people who witnessed the tottering of European cities or the obliteration of Japanese cities. Cities are fragile, subject to natural disaster and political upheaval. Jerusalem fell. So what are we to draw from Psalm 46 that speaks so highly and loftily of the city of God? Perhaps we are placing the emphasis on the wrong idea, the emphasis on the wrong idea. The city of God is strong because God dwells there, the psalmist says. It isn't the city that is strong, it is the dwelling place of God that will not be tottered. In the New Testament, we are told that we are the temple of God, that God lives in the hearts and minds of humanity. We are the dwelling place of God. The living spirit of any religion shines through most clearly in its hymns. We can sing this psalm with confidence because we believe a little differently. We needn't fear the ills of society or the political changes that sweep over the earth. War, terrorism, oppression. Our psalm tells us that God will abolish these. We needn't fear natural disaster, flood, storm, fire, illness, infirmity, adversity. God is in control. If God is dwelling in us and among us, we will not be secure retreat for us is the God of Jacob. Selah.